Hello, everyone, and welcome to the short form theater of the Golden Silent Films podcast, where we are about to engage in some serious updating. If you are unaware, YouTube is the new home of exclusive short form content, any and all show updates, and other newsworthy reports. Stay up to date, follow us on Instagram, Bluesky, or Twitter, or X. Oh, and while you're here on YouTube, like and subscribe. It would mean so much to our growing channel. This episode is literally being written live and on location at the Columbus Moving Picture Show convention. So much cool stuff was going on over the course of the 4-day show that we were compelled to pass on some updates and coverage of this awesome vintage film event. The first bit of business on our list is to add a bit of an addendum to our most recent podcast episode where we did a deep dive into the lore of 1919's The False Faces. It occupied a pretty important spot in the rundown of the con. It was the first full-length feature to be screened, and it was the first stop on my itinerary. Going into the convention, my only access to The False Faces came from copies on YouTube and DVD, which is always the go-to for a physical media guy like me. Every version I was able to watch was varying levels of good enough, and for this movie, good enough took away from a lot of the great visuals that director Irvin Willett set out to show us. The dark and hard-to-see visuals tended to affect the intertitles the most, but how do we overcome these faults? Well, you watch the film on a gorgeous 16mm print being run through a projector in a near-capacity screening room. The False Faces did all of that. Like I mentioned, I got checked in and registered and wasted no time in getting a seat for this espionage thriller. It had to be better quality, right? To answer simply, it was a whole new viewing experience, so much so that I had to make an immediate follow-up/update episode. First, seeing those troublesome intertitles in this format was a revelation. There were so many details and small artistic flourishes that I just never saw on my previous viewings. In this film, some verbiage was overlaid upon moving images, and those instances stood out so much more this time around. And we still did get to see that cigarette over and over and over again, just this time with way more clarity. As a result of the better image quality, the story and narrative also benefited. There were a few times in the film that I would get lost or confused because I missed a subtle detail or intertitle. On this watch, though, the story flowed way better and was so much more impactful. I'm not kidding when I say it was like watching a whole new movie. Tinting. Let's talk about it. On no version I watched previously was there ever any tinting. I was blown away and super surprised when it popped into the film to delineate night from day. That's another example where the comprehension of the story only increased. You don't realize how much some of these small details can really affect how you perceive the movie and the story it's trying to tell. Another piece of the film I enjoyed so much more in the 16mm format was the action. I love a great action movie, and this certainly is one of those. There was so much over-the-top action, and it was fantastic to see it all so clearly. The big finale set piece was so much better this time around. Lanyard climbing that crane was way more harrowing experience on the big screen and with a big crowd of people all on the edge of their seats. I was one of those people on the edge of my seat as the lone wolf made that treacherous climb to gain entry into the bad guy clubhouse. The swing Lanyard made into the high-rise hideout was way cooler with these enhanced visuals. That brings us to the climactic hand-to-hand combat between Lanyard and Lon Chaney's Ekstrom. I missed so many small touches and details over my previous viewings. I loved how the action hit harder, and I was able to notice way more everyday decorative objects being used as weapons. It was so much fun to see two actors get so physical, and it was even more fun seeing the audience reactions to every blow. Thomas Ince was a big vision and idea guy. He and director Irvin Willett set out to make The False Faces an incredibly ambitious cinematic event. To see that, look no further than the high seas action in this film. It would have been a bummer to have such large-scale cinematic seafaring totally confined to blurry YouTube and DVD releases. That wrong has been righted via the 16mm projected images shown here in Columbus. It's always great seeing submarines on screen. Watching ocean liners zipping around ain't half bad either. And that was all crystal clear, or at least as crystal clear as a 100-plus-year-old film can be on a reel. The talk about visuals has been front and center so far. By now, we are just beating a dead seahorse. So, let's wrap up the False Face chat with one more positive from this 16mm experience. That last bullet point is the performances. While the acting work of Henry Walthall and Lon Chaney was good during my earliest watches, this was a total upgrade. The work of Walthall especially was great to see because there were so many new details to be seen in his performance. From subtle facial moves to more physical actions, his performances really were kicked up a notch. As for Chaney, while his character was still fairly one-dimensional, the extra 16mm details added some cool new depth to Carl Ekstrom. I cannot stress enough how cool these 16mm screenings are. It is an amazing way to experience these classic films and is definitely a great selling point for the Columbus Moving Picture Show. The accompaniment from David Drazen really added to the spectacle. As a classic film fan, there really is no better place to see these films than this convention, and the packed and super enthusiastic audiences only made the whole event so much more unforgettable. So while we are on the topic of how awesome the Columbus Moving Picture Show was, let's dive into some of the great events we took part in for a little con roundup/debrief. This was by no means a comprehensive breakdown, just some of the standout moments across the 4 days we were there. And we can only give a abbreviated version because there was so much to see and do that this episode would go on forever. Now, the first order of business was seeing the false faces. Once that was out of the way, it was time to grab a pen and start marking up the super in-depth convention program and plan out the rest of the weekend. Let me tell you now, that is no easy feat, and the next segment of this short will give you a glimpse into some of my cinematic escapades. The next film I caught was 1926 Colleen Moore comedy Irene. This screening started off with an introduction from author and film historian Thomas J. Slater, whom we will talk about more in a bit. This was a super fun film and really only added to my love of Colleen Moore. Just when I think she can't be any more talented and charming, she really does outdo herself. One of the featured stars of this year's convention is the legendary W.C. Fields. To honor and educate, a slate of 4 films were part of the movie programming. This series of films really displayed the wide breadth of talents the comedian brought to the screen. In a packed screening room, audiences were treated to classics like It's the Old Army Game, The Fatal Glass of Beer, $1 Million Legs, and The Old-Fashioned Way. If all of that silver screen silliness wasn't enough, the screening of 1933's The Fatal Glass of Beer was preceded by an intro from Fields historian William Garver. One of the things that really makes the Columbus Moving Picture Show such a great immersive experience is the fantastic group of speakers engaged to give these classic films a little bit of added context for the audience. If getting short pre-movie introductions weren't enough, many of these same speakers put on seminars and question and answer sessions. They would also sign copies of their books after their chat sessions, which was super cool. These events are great because you get some fantastic deep dives into all aspects of classic film. Now, there are 2 seminars I especially want to shout out. The schedule was so packed, I unfortunately had to miss a good chunk of them. Next year, I will really kind of do my best. I'll endeavor to catch a few more of them, because they are that good. If you've been a listener to the podcast of any length of time, you know we have mentioned June Mathis a number of times. We're big fans of her here at the home office, so when we saw that the aforementioned Thomas J. Slater was giving a presentation on Mathis and talking about his biography about her, it became a can't-miss event. His talk was super informative and really gave a great overview of the life of a cinematic legend who really isn't so well known today. We loved every second of it, and the slideshow presentation really filled out the story. I was so excited to snag a copy of the book, and he could not have been nicer and chatted with me for a few moments. Hopefully, if everything goes to plan, you'll be seeing a photo of me talking to the author on the YouTube stream. The other presentation was one I went into with little expectation, but left super inspired and ready to double down on my commitment to this podcast. The seminar I'm talking about was put on by Laurel and Hardy scholar and expert Randy Skretvet. He has been a diehard fan of the comedy duo since childhood and has amassed an incredible collection of interviews and interactions with tons of people who worked on screen and off with the duo. He shared these recordings and photos, and it was amazing seeing Laurel and Hardy from the perspective of others. I enjoy Laurel and Hardy, but would never call myself a super fan. After this seminar, I think that's about to change. Everyone in the conference room was hanging on every word and story told about the Funnymen. That love was contagious, and seeing how hard Randy worked to preserve these stories really lit a fire under me and made me want to build up this podcast even more. To be someone who, like Randy, keeps these stories alive for generations is really something I aspire to and I try to do my best with this podcast. So let's return to the classic films that brought us here. My viewing wasn't strictly confined to the world of the silent film. On Friday, I was caught off guard by the unexpected noir silliness of 1951's The Magic Face. My last film of the night involved 2 of our favorite things, Richard Arlen and Airplanes. Flying Blind, a 1941 romantic comedy about a small honeymoon airline, was so much fun, and I cannot recommend it enough. Saturday saw us catch in the standing room only section 3 hilarious Buster Keaton shorts. Those were followed up by the 1917 Cecil B. DeMille picture, The Little American. This film had a great intro by Scott Iman. And due to various Golden Silent Film podcast bylaws, all DeMille films require mandatory attendance. I really enjoyed this World War I film for sure. My last film of the weekend was Miss Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch. This is one of the few surviving Marguerite Clark films, and I didn't want to miss it. It was a perfect way to wind down the crazy convention weekend. The preceding was but a sampling of the films and events I attended over the course of the weekend. If I went into detail about everything like I mentioned earlier, it would cease to be short-form content. So, with this episode winding down, I have to talk about the incredible vendor haul. Luckily, I had a few bucks tucked away in the podcast's petty cash case, and a willingness to buy a bunch of cool stuff I want but don't necessarily need. Even if you don't buy anything, the vendor tables are like walking through a museum. There is so much amazing stuff to look at, from posters to physical media to art and books. I went home with some great old magazines, books, and DVDs. If you would like to see my CMPS haul, let us know in the comments. What were you able to find in the convention's vendor area? Let us know that as well. Before we close down shop, I wanted to take this opportunity to, pull back the curtain a bit. It's events like this that really reinvigorate me and really give me the push to keep plugging away at the podcast. I am not a professional. This is truly a hobby podcast and done for the love of silent and classic film. I often get tired and discouraged if the listens aren't as high as I want them to be, or if no one is subscribing to the YouTube channel. It's easy to stop and ask, why the heck am I even doing this? When I see the love of film and genuine human-to-human camaraderie that happens at the Columbus Moving Picture Show, I realize making this podcast is totally worth it. It's for the folks at the CMPS that I push forward with the show regardless of the net gains. And it's not just those in attendance at Columbus, but for everyone out there that lives and dies with classic film, this podcast lives and hopefully grows. Regardless, I left Columbus with a renewed sense of purpose, and for everyone who has supported the show or will support the show in the future, the Golden Silent Films podcast isn't going anywhere. If you want to learn more about the Golden Silent Films podcast, you can find us on Instagram and Bluesky at Golden Silence Cast, and on Twitter/X at Golden Silence 1. And while you are here on YouTube, like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. It would mean the world to this small and hopefully growing channel. And don't forget, you know the words, the silents are golden and the talkies, they're just a fad.